In the blistering heat of Florida, a cop's secret affair turned deadly, unraveling a story of betrayal, lust, and murder that would send shockwaves through an entire community. What happens when a man sworn to protect crosses every line imaginable? This is the story of Jake Carter, Tyler Matthews, and Mia Larson, a love triangle that ended in a gruesome murder no one saw coming. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a shocking story. You won't want to miss what happens next in this tale of betrayal and murder. Florida, a place known for its sunny beaches, vibrant nightlife, and endless palm trees swaying in the breeze. But beneath the surface, there's a different side, a side filled with secrets, lies, and betrayal. In the heat of the day, the air is thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, and it's in this tension-filled atmosphere that the story of Jake Carter, Tyler Matthews, and Mia Larson unfolds. Jake Carter was a respected police officer, known for his professionalism and dedication. But there was another side to Jake, a side that only a few knew about. Beneath his uniform, behind his badge, lay a man willing to cross any line for what he wanted. Tyler Matthews, Jake's best friend, was a loyal and hardworking man, struggling to support Mia and their unborn child. He trusted Jake like a brother, never suspecting the betrayal that would soon shatter everything he knew. And then there was Mia Larson, Tyler's pregnant baby mama. Caught between her loyalty to Tyler and the undeniable pull of desire for Jake, Mia found herself trapped in a web of deceit and longing, unsure of where to turn as everything around her began to unravel. Jake and Tyler's bond had always been unbreakable. They were more than just friends, they were brothers in every sense of the word. From the time they were kids, they shared everything. They spent summers fishing at the lake, stayed up late swapping stories, and always had each other's backs, no matter what. Even as they grew older, their friendship never wavered. Jake was the steady force in Tyler's life, the one who helped him through rough patches, the one who never let him down. Tyler, in turn, trusted Jake with his deepest fears, his biggest dreams. Together, they had built a life, one that was filled with hard work, loyalty, and shared memories. But all of that came crashing down the moment Jake made a choice that would destroy everything. Mia had entered Tyler's life at a time when things weren't easy. Pregnant with his child, she was already feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Tyler worked long hours, struggling to make ends meet, and Mia was left to deal with the challenges of pregnancy on her own. The stress was taking its toll on her, and she often felt alone. That's when Jake stepped in. He'd always been there for Tyler, and now, he began to be there for Mia. At first, it was just casual check-ins, making sure she was okay when Tyler was too busy. He'd bring her food, offer a listening ear, and reassure her when she was feeling overwhelmed. But as time passed, the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. Jake's presence became more frequent. He'd linger a little longer, make her laugh with jokes that Tyler couldn't understand. Mia started to look forward to those moments, the times when she could escape her worries and feel the warmth of someone who cared. But it wasn't just comfort she was seeking. There was something more, something in the way Jake's eyes would hold hers, in the way his hand brushed hers just a little too long. She tried to ignore it, tried to push the feelings down, but they only grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Jake stayed a little longer than usual. Tyler was working late, and Mia was sitting on the porch, trying to relax after a long day. Jake joined her, his presence filling the space between them. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily. But as the night deepened, so did the tension between them. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken. It started with a touch. Jake's hand brushed against hers as he reached for the bottle of water she had sitting next to her. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She pulled her hand back quickly, but Jake didn't seem to notice. He smiled, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. But the silence that followed was different. Mia could feel her heart racing, could feel the heat rising between them. She looked at Jake, and for the first time, she saw him differently. His gaze wasn't just friendly, it was intense, filled with something she couldn't ignore. The next few days were a blur. Every time Jake came over, the tension between them grew. The stolen moments, the quiet touches, the way he'd stand a little too close when he spoke to her, it was all too much to resist. One night, as the moonlight filtered through the blinds, Jake leaned in closer than ever before. His breath was warm against her skin, and before she could stop herself, her lips were on his. It was a kiss that shattered everything, her loyalty to Tyler, the friendship with Jake, and the life she had built with Tyler. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, marking the beginning of a forbidden affair neither of them could walk away from. What started as an innocent connection, a comforting presence in the midst of her struggles, quickly became something far more dangerous. The stolen moments, the quiet touches, the conversations that lingered too long, it all led to a point of no return. They were no longer just friends. They were something else, something that would destroy everything in its path. And as the affair deepened, so did the danger. Neither Jake nor Mia could resist the pull, but they both knew the consequences of their actions would be far more devastating than they could ever imagine. As the affair between Jake and Mia deepened, the stolen moments became their new reality. Late nights, when the world was asleep, became their time. They met in places that no one could trace, dimly lit hotel rooms, dark corners of quiet diners, places where they could exist without fear of being caught. The air was thick with secrecy, and each time they met, it felt like they were dancing on the edge of disaster. Their hearts raced with anticipation, knowing the danger of what they were doing, but the thrill of it all made it impossible to stop. Jake, ever the manipulator, began weaving promises that only fueled Mia's desire to escape. He painted a picture of a life where she was free from the constant stress and struggles with Tyler. He spoke of a future where Mia would no longer have to worry about finances, about being stuck in a relationship that felt more like a burden than a partnership. He made her believe that she deserved more, that she was worth more than the life she had with Tyler. Every word he spoke was a thread in the web he was weaving around her, pulling her in deeper with every promise of a better life. For Mia, it was intoxicating. She had always felt trapped, burdened by the responsibilities of pregnancy and the looming uncertainty of her future with Tyler. Jake made her feel alive again, seen, desired, wanted. His touch was electric, and every moment with him was filled with a passion she hadn't felt in years. But as the affair grew, so did her guilt. Every stolen kiss, every whispered word of affection, felt like a betrayal to Tyler. He had been there for her, stood by her side through the hardest parts of her life. And now, here she was, in the arms of his best friend, the man who was supposed to be his brother. But Mia couldn't stop herself. The pull of Jake was too strong, too overwhelming. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but the promises of a new life, a life where she didn't have to worry, were too tempting to resist. Each time Jake held her, she felt like she was floating, like she was finally escaping from the life she had known. But each time they parted, the guilt would settle in, like a heavy weight on her chest, reminding her of the life she was tearing apart. Jake, on the other hand, was fully aware of the power he held. As a cop, he had access to everything they needed to keep their affair a secret. He knew how to cover his tracks, how to manipulate situations so that no one would question their late-night meetings or strange behavior. He was always one step ahead, using his badge and his position to keep things under control. If anyone got too close to the truth, he was there, swooping in with his calm demeanor and his reassuring words. He'd use his authority to push them away, to intimidate anyone who might start asking questions. Whenever someone suspected something, whether it was a neighbor, a colleague, or even a stranger who noticed the odd timing of their encounters, Jake would shut it down with ease. He'd use his badge to make them back off, his authority enough to make them question their own instincts. If anyone got too close, Jake was there, ready to bury the truth beneath layers of lies and intimidation. He was a man who knew how to bend the rules to his will, and he wasn't afraid to use his position to protect what he wanted. Mia, though, couldn't ignore the growing unease in her gut. She could feel Jake's control over her tightening, could see the way he used his power not just to protect their affair, but to manipulate everyone around them. It was suffocating. The secrecy, the lies, the way Jake controlled every aspect of their relationship, it was becoming too much to bear. But by then, it was too late. They had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The affair was no longer just a secret, it was a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually explode and destroy everything in its path. The more they hid, the more dangerous it became. And the more dangerous it became, the more they were willing to risk to keep it hidden. Tyler's heart was hammering in his chest as he stormed into the living room, the phone still burning in his hand. Mia was sitting on the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The moment he stepped into the room, she froze, her eyes flickering up to meet his. The air seemed to thicken, and for a split second, everything stood still. Tyler's voice was low, but the fury in it was unmistakable. "Mia," he began, his tone cutting through the silence like a knife. "We need to talk." Her face paled instantly, her breath catching in her throat. She put the magazine down, but her hands trembled slightly as she did. "Tyler, what's wrong?" Her voice wavered, but there was no hiding the guilt in her eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what he had found. His hands shook with the intensity of his anger as he took a step closer. "Don't play dumb with me," he spat. "I know about you and Jake. I know everything." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she said nothing. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then, her face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but Tyler was already cutting her off, his voice rising with each word. "How long, Mia? How long has this been going on? How could you do this to me? To us?" Her shoulders sagged under the weight of his words, but Tyler couldn't stop now. His chest heaved with each breath, the rage and hurt bubbling over. "You've been lying to me this whole time. While I've been busting my ass to provide for you, for our future, you've been in bed with him. My best friend. My brother." Mia reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to touch his arm, but he recoiled, stepping back as if her touch burned him. "Tyler, please, just let me explain." "Explain?" Tyler's voice cracked, his anger nearly choking him. "There's nothing to explain, Mia. I saw the messages. I saw the photos. You've been sleeping with Jake behind my back, and you think I can just forget that?" Her face crumpled, and the tears started to fall. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to happen, but it did. I didn't know what to do, Tyler." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He staggered back, his mind racing. His best friend. The man who had been by his side through everything. And Mia, the woman he had been building a life with. They had both betrayed him in ways he couldn't even comprehend. His breath came in ragged gasps as he turned on his heel, his fists clenched at his sides. "I don't want to hear it," he growled, his voice thick with disgust. "You've already said enough." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, his mind a blur of rage and disbelief. He had to confront Jake. He had to hear it from him. Tyler couldn't let this go. Not like this. The drive to Jake's house was a blur. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed the images from Mia's phone over and over again, Jake's smiling face, the intimate messages, the betrayal that cut deeper than anything he had ever felt before. By the time he reached Jake's house, his blood was boiling, his entire body tense with the need for confrontation. Jake opened the door, his face a mask of confusion when he saw Tyler standing there, fists clenched, eyes burning with fury. "Tyler? What's going on?" Jake's voice was calm, too calm, and that only made Tyler's rage flare higher. Tyler didn't say a word. He shoved past Jake, his shoulder knocking him aside as he stormed into the house. "We need to talk," Tyler said, his voice low and dangerous. Jake stepped back, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Tyler, what's this about?" Tyler didn't give him a chance to explain. "You think you can just screw my girl? You think you can betray me like this, and get away with it?" Jake's eyes widened, but he quickly tried to regain control. What the hell are you talking about? Tyler's fists clenched tighter, his jaw grinding as he took another step forward. I know about you and Mia. I know everything. You've been sleeping with her behind my back. Jake's face shifted, the shock giving way to something else, anger, guilt, fear. It was a look Tyler had never seen before, but it didn't matter. The betrayal was too much. His best friend, the man he had trusted above all others, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Tyler lunged at him, his body fueled by an animalistic need for revenge. The punch landed hard, knocking Jake back a few steps. The force of it sent shockwaves through both men, but Tyler wasn't done. He didn't care that Jake was a cop. He didn't care about anything but the rage that had taken over him. Jake staggered back, his hand reaching for something, anything, to defend himself, but it was too late. Tyler was already on him, fists flying. The blows came fast and hard, each one landing with a brutal force. Jake tried to fight back, but Tyler's fury was unstoppable. The room was filled with the sound of fists against flesh, the grunts of exertion, the crash of furniture as they collided with it. Jake managed to shove Tyler away, but Tyler was back on him in an instant. The violence escalated, the fight becoming more desperate, more vicious with each passing second. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls shaking with the intensity of their struggle. Tyler's breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurring with rage, but he didn't care. He just wanted Jake to feel the pain, the betrayal, the loss that Tyler was experiencing. Violence was inevitable, and the consequences would be far worse than either of them could have imagined. The night was thick with tension, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel amplified. Tyler's anger had been building for hours, and now, as he stormed back to Jake's house, he had no idea what awaited him. His body was bruised and battered from the earlier fight, but the fury in his chest burned hotter than ever. He needed answers. He needed to confront Jake, to make him pay for what he had done, but Jake had already anticipated this moment. He knew Tyler would come for him, and he was prepared. With the precision of a trained officer, Jake had positioned himself in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had been planning this for days, his mind racing with the thought of eliminating the one person who stood in the way of his future with MIA.as. Tyler's car rumbled down the dark street, its headlights cutting through the night. Jake remained hidden. He had parked his own car out of sight, the weapon he'd taken from the police department now cold and heavy in his hand. He felt no hesitation. No remorse. Just a deep, cold certainty that this was the only way to protect his secret, to keep Mia for himself. Tyler stepped out of his car, his movements tense and angry. He didn't see Jake, didn't hear him as he moved silently through the shadows. But Jake saw him, and that was all that mattered. With a sudden burst of movement, Jake lunged. His body slammed into Tyler's, knocking him to the ground with a force that took the wind out of him. Tyler gasped, his hands instinctively reaching for the dirt as he tried to push Jake off. But Jake was too strong, too quick. He pinned Tyler down, his knees pressing into his chest, the weight of his body suffocating Tyler's struggle. Tyler's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes wide with shock. He didn't know what was happening, didn't understand how it had escalated so quickly. He tried to fight back, but Jake's grip was ironclad. Then, Tyler saw it, Jake's hand moving to his waistband, pulling out the gun with a calmness that sent a chill down his spine. No, Tyler muttered, his voice a hoarse whisper. Jake, please, but there was no mercy in Jake's eyes. No hesitation. With a cold, methodical motion, Jake pressed the barrel of the gun against Tyler's chest and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the quiet night, and Tyler's body jerked violently, the impact of the bullet tearing through his flesh. Blood poured from the wound, staining the earth beneath them. Tyler's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. He gasped for air, his body twitching with the remnants of life, but Jake wasn't finished. The second shot rang out, echoing in the stillness. This time, Tyler's body went limp, his head lolling to the side as the light in his eyes flickered out. Jake stood over him, his breath steady, his pulse calm. He had done it. Tyler was dead. The man who had once been his closest friend, the man who had trusted him above all others, was gone. Jake didn't feel the rush of adrenaline he expected. Instead, there was only a cold, numbing emptiness. He wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to shake off the unsettling calm that had settled over him. With a grunt, Jake grabbed Tyler's lifeless body, dragging it with surprising ease toward the edge of the property. The ground was soft, the earth giving way easily beneath his hands as he began to dig. There was no panic, no sense of urgency. He had done this before, in training, in practice. The motions were automatic, as if he were burying a piece of trash rather than the body of his best friend. The hole was shallow, but deep enough to conceal the evidence. Jake shoved Tyler's body into the grave, his hands covered in dirt and blood. He didn't care. He just needed to make sure there was no trace left behind. The weight of the body settled into the earth, and Jake began to cover it with dirt, each shovelful falling with a sickening finality. When the grave was filled, Jake stood over it, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He wiped his hands on his pants, the dirt caked onto his skin, and for a moment, he just stood there, staring down at the spot where Tyler now lay. The man who had been his brother, his confidant, was gone. And all for Mia. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the wind. Jake's mind raced, but there was no fear, no regret. He had done what needed to be done. He had protected his secret. He had secured his future with Mia. But as Jake walked away from the grave, his steps slow and deliberate, a gnawing feeling began to settle in the pit of his stomach. He had buried Tyler, but he couldn't bury the consequences of what he had done. The brutality of the act, the coldness with which he had taken a life, would haunt him. Or so he thought. The news of Tyler's brutal murder sent shockwaves through the small Florida town, and the community was left reeling. How could a man sworn to protect them, a trusted cop like Jake Carter, be capable of such a horrific act? The disbelief was palpable. Tyler had been loved by everyone, hardworking, loyal, and a father-to-be, and now he was gone, murdered by the very man who should have been his protector. The investigation started quickly, but the sense of shock was still heavy in the air. People couldn't fathom the possibility that Jake was behind the crime. He had always been seen as a pillar of the community, a reliable officer, someone who had put in years of service with a reputation for doing the right thing. But the evidence began to pile up, and the truth started to unravel. Phone records were the first crack in the facade. Investigators found a string of late-night calls and texts between Jake and Mia, Tyler's pregnant baby mama. The messages weren't just casual exchanges, they were full of longing, promises of a future together, and plans to escape the life they were both trapped in. As the investigators dug deeper, they uncovered even more. Jake's phone had pinged off the same towers as Mia's at strange hours, further linking the two in a secret relationship that had lasted far longer than anyone had known. Then came the blood. Tyler's blood was found all over Jake's uniform, staining the fabric of the very man who had sworn to uphold the law. DNA evidence from the crime scene confirmed that Jake had been at the murder site, and it didn't take long to piece together that the fatal shot had come from Jake's gun. Witnesses reported hearing a car speeding away from the scene that night, and when they checked the vehicle's registration, it was Jake's car. But despite the mounting evidence, Jake wasn't immediately arrested. It was clear that there were forces at work, deep within the police department, trying to protect him. Corruption ran through the veins of the force like a poison. Officers who had worked with Jake for years, men who had called him a brother, were now using their influence to shield him from justice. They spread rumors, planted false leads, and tried to twist the narrative, hoping to paint Tyler's death as some tragic accident or a crime of passion that had gone too far. The corruption was thick, and it seemed like Jake might just get away with murder. But the community wasn't fooled. People were angry, and they demanded answers. Tyler had been a part of their lives for so long, and now they were left with nothing but questions. How could Jake do this? How could he betray the trust of everyone who had known him? The pressure was mounting, and the investigation was far from over. Then came Mia's testimony. She had been the catalyst for the entire mess, the woman who had torn apart a friendship and led to a murder. Now, she was caught in the middle of it all. She couldn't deny the affair any longer, but she also didn't want to take the full blame for what had happened. She had been manipulated, sure, but she had still played a role in the tragedy. When Mia was called in to testify, she was a nervous wreck. She knew that her life was about to change forever. She had tried to distance herself from Jake, tried to walk away from the chaos they had created, but it was too late. The damage was done. I in the witness stand, Mia's words trembled as she spoke of the affair. She admitted to everything, how she had been drawn to Jake, how their relationship had started innocently enough, but quickly escalated into something dangerous. She described how she had tried to end things, how she had felt guilty for betraying Tyler, but it was clear she had never truly broken free from Jake's hold. I didn't want this, Mia said, her voice cracking. I never wanted any of this. But Jake, he wouldn't let me go. He promised me things I thought I wanted. But now I see how wrong it all was. But when it came time to talk about Jake's role in Tyler's death, Mia hesitated. She couldn't bring herself to fully condemn him. There was still a part of her that was loyal to him, that didn't want to believe the man she had loved could be capable of murder. She spoke of Jake's promises, of how he had manipulated her into believing they could have a future together, away from Tyler and the life they had. But when it came to the murder, Mia was careful with her words. She didn't want to be the one to send him to prison, but she knew she couldn't lie either. I didn't know it would end like this, Mia continued, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know Jake would do what he did. But I know now that it's all my fault too. I should have stopped it. I should have never let it go this far. Her testimony didn't absolve her of guilt, but it painted a picture of a woman caught in a whirlwind of manipulation and desire. It was clear that Jake had used her, just as much as she had used him, and now they were both trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. The investigation continued, but the corruption within the police force remained a shadow over the case. It was unclear whether Jake would face justice or if the forces protecting him would succeed in burying the truth. But one thing was certain, the town would never be the same. The betrayal, the affair, and the murder had shattered the illusion of safety that had once surrounded them all. And now, as the investigation unfolded, the community demanded answers. Would Jake be held accountable for his actions, or would the corruption within the force allow him to walk free? The courtroom was electric with anticipation as the trial reached its final stages. Every seat was filled, every eye locked on the defense and prosecution teams, and the air seemed to crackle with the tension of what was about to unfold. The small town had been rocked to its core by the shocking betrayal, and now, they were all here to witness the fate of the man responsible for it, the man they had once trusted to serve and protect. Jake Carter's defense team did everything they could to humanize him, to paint him as a man caught in the grip of a passionate, destructive love. They argued that his actions had been born of desperation, that his betrayal of his best friend Tyler and his involvement with Mia were the result of a man pushed to his emotional limits. They painted Jake as a victim of his own desires, someone who had been overwhelmed by the affair and acted out of a misguided sense of love. They even suggested that Jake's troubled past had led him to make reckless decisions in an attempt to escape the life he had built, but the prosecution was relentless. They weren't buying the defense's narrative of a man in love. Instead, they focused on the chilling coldness of Jake's actions. The evidence was damning, his calculated manipulation of Mia, the lies, the deceit, and the brutal murder of his best friend. They painted Jake not as a victim of love, but as a man who had used his position as a police officer to control the situation, to silence those who might have suspected the affair, and ultimately, to eliminate Tyler in the most violent, merciless way. The prosecution's case was clear. Jake had killed Tyler to protect his own selfish desires, willing to take out anyone who stood in the way of his twisted romance. The courtroom was tense as each piece of evidence was laid out, each testimony building a damning case against Jake. The defense's efforts to paint him as a sympathetic figure were met with skepticism and disbelief. The jury, clearly swayed by the prosecution's argument, seemed to grow more and more convinced of Jake's guilt with every passing moment. The truth was undeniable. Jake had murdered his best friend, and no amount of defense could erase the horror of his actions. As the trial reached its conclusion, the jury deliberated in silence. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every second felt like an eternity. When the verdict was finally read, the room fell into a stunned silence. The words echoed through the courtroom, "Guilty of first-degree murder." The community gasped in disbelief. The man they had once trusted to protect them, the man who had sworn an oath to serve and uphold the law, was now a convicted murderer. The sentencing phase was equally tense. Jake stood before the judge, his face unreadable, but the weight of his actions hung heavily in the room. The judge's words were sharp, cold, and final. Jake was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down with a resounding thud, sealing Jake's fate. The community, still reeling from the betrayal, could finally begin to process the devastation he had caused. The man who had once been a pillar of their town was now nothing more than a criminal, a murderer. Mia, on the other hand, was left to carry the burden of her own guilt. While she had not been charged with murder, her involvement in the affair and her betrayal of Tyler were undeniable. The community was divided on whether she should have faced charges, but the legal system had determined that she was not directly responsible for Tyler's death. However, the emotional toll on Mia was far from over. She had lost Tyler, the man she had once loved, and she had lost herself in the process. The affair with Jake had destroyed her, and the weight of her choices would haunt her for the rest of her life. The town, once a place of trust and community, was left shattered in the wake of Jake's betrayal. The murder of Tyler, the affair, and the shocking revelations that followed had torn apart the very fabric of their lives. The town would never be the same, and as Jake was led away to prison, the haunting question remained: how could something so dark, so destructive, have unfolded in their midst? A lifelong friendship destroyed, a family torn apart, and a community left questioning how far someone can fall when consumed by desire. The tragic events surrounding Jake Carter, Tyler, and Mia serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of trust, and how quickly it can be shattered by betrayal. What started as a secret affair, a stolen moment of passion, spiraled into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. Jake's story is a chilling one, not just because of the murder, but because it shows how easily someone can be consumed by their own desires, willing to destroy everything they once held dear for the sake of their own selfish needs. A man who once swore an oath to protect, now stands as a symbol of how far someone can fall when they let their darkest impulses take control. Jake Carter's story is a haunting reminder that even those we trust most can harbor the darkest secrets. And as the dust settles on this tragedy, the community is left to pick up the pieces, forever changed by the actions of one man who couldn't escape the temptation of his own desires. What do you think? Was Mia a victim, caught in a web of deceit, or was she an accomplice, just as guilty as Jake? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another shocking true crime tale. We bring you new stories every week, so stay tuned for more mysteries, betrayals, and twists you won't see coming.